Welcome to the Plant Trainers Podcast, where we're helping people improve their quality of life through nutrition and fitness. And now, your hosts, nutrition and wellness coaches, international speakers, Adam and Shoshana Chaim.
Hey, I'm Adam Chaim.
And I'm Shoshana Chaim, and we are
Propelled by Plants. Today we bring to you episode 363, Understanding Pandemics Like COVID-19 with Dr. Tushar Mehta.
In this episode of the Plant Trainers Podcast, we talk with Dr. Tushar Mehta about past, current, and future pandemics. It's really important to understand some of the most impactful reasons pandemics start so that we could start to make decisions that put us in the best possible position not to have these pandemics happen again. We talk about what pandemics actually are. We break down some other important vocabulary like zoonosis, and we talk about why viruses morph. You're going to find this super interesting, so buckle up your seatbelts because this is a long one, but really important.
Dr. Mehta is an ER physician working in the Toronto area and has practiced family and addictions medicine in the past. Over the years, he's worked with Project CANOE, a Toronto-based organization serving youth. He also conducted medical outreach with village schools in Kutch, India, and currently works with Health Education Project in Haiti. In 2013, he spent 4 months sailing with Sea Shepherd Conservation Society to protect whales in Antarctic waters. Dr. Mehta is very interested in the evidence for plant-based diet as it impacts health and ecology. Currently, he's reviewing evidence for the role of animal agriculture in viral pandemics. Along with a small team, he's created a database of literature called Plant-Based Data to help people access the best research regarding a plant-based diet on these important subjects.
Just wanted to pop in here and remind you about our Easy Recipes for Busy Parents e-cookbook, where we help you to really get meals done for a whole week. Make sure that we overlap ingredients so that you don't have to go out buying a crazy amount of ingredients that you're never going to use again. And the recipes are pretty simple and children aren't scared of them when they're trying them out for the first time. So if you want to get that, you could click the link in the show notes or pop over to planttrainers.com/shop and check out our Easy Recipe for Busy Parents cookbook. And now back to the show.
And now for a moment of gratitude.
The other night, I was giving a presentation, online of course, and the ladies were talking about their brain fog, they were talking about their inflammation, they were talking about their inability to do sports that they used to do, and my heart really bled for them. And at the same time, I felt so grateful for being able to overcome some of the health challenges that I've had and feel like myself.
I am grateful for the 10K a day challenge that I was doing virtually and having so many of our listeners and followers on our social media platforms joining in and donating to Make-A-Wish Foundation. I'm just so grateful for everybody getting more active and all the money we've raised. So thank you.
Dr. Tushar Mehta, welcome back to the Plant Trainers Podcast.
Thank you, Shoshana and Adam. I'm glad to be back.
So we're kind of chuckling because we recorded the first 4 minutes of it and then Adam's computer went out and we're restarting. So if the first few minutes sounds like, hey, maybe we did this before, it's because we have. But we did have you on episode 280 of the Plant Trainers Podcast. That was a long time ago, but we do see you at a lot of the events here in Toronto. We've heard you speak. You've heard us speak, which is an honor, and we're grateful for that. And we wanted to know what you're grateful for today.
All right. Well, number one, I'm very grateful for my recent marriage. I got married in February. It was in India to my longtime partner, Yin. We had an amazing time and we're continuing to have an amazing time. So it's been quite good. You know, a really happy story.
Marriage.
And pardon me?
A quarantine marriage.
Quarantine marriage, you know, actually being in quarantine means that we didn't get to have a honeymoon, but we spent a lot of time together and that's been good. It's been good for us, actually, and really good for us. The second thing on the other that is a bit more of a somber note is that, you know, I'm very sorrowful for the recent death of Mr. George Floyd. And so many other people, Black people, who have suffered from racism, you know, recently and in the, you know, throughout history. And thankful for the movement Black Lives Matter and other movements too that are led by Black people for the rights and well-being and upliftment of Black people everywhere. I don't know if you know, but I do work in Haiti with a local group there, a small local group there. And these issues are worldwide. They're very deep and complicated. And I hope that my wish is that I'm thankful for the movement, but my wish is that, after, recent events, I hope that it doesn't simmer down, that people keep working, because it's going to take a lot of work that we're going to have to all do together in support of this issue.
There's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I know our hearts go out to his friends and family and to all the Black communities, especially the ones that are seeming, or the individuals who are getting more racist comments towards them through this. I think that there's a lot of learning that needs to be done. I think that there's a lot of people listening to, and I'm so grateful for the movement, because we have learned so much over the last 2 weeks that had never come across our eyes before, or our thoughts before, and thinking about things in different ways, and what we want our children to understand, and how we want them to be. I mean, we've always wanted them to be part of the solution, not the problem, but even more so in this situation. So although there seems to be a lot more hate being loud right now, I think that there's a lot more love as well, and that there's a lot more understanding, and that the world is on its way to changing, whatever that looks like and whatever else needs to be done. But, these movements are amazing, and they've done a great job.
There's a lot more kindness coming out too now, which is something that this world really needs in these tough times, not only with regards to what you're talking about, with also regards to COVID-19 and all that's going on over the last 3 months.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of miscommunication, a lot of ignorance, whether it be on purpose or not on purpose. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding going on in the world right now. And that's why we're so grateful to have you on today. Although there have been a lot of people who have reached out to us to say, hey, we want to talk about COVID-19. We're experts, and we're going to help people understand more. We've shied away from those interviews because we don't know those people well enough to know, A, what's going to come out of their mouth, and B, have they done the research properly? And I know that, the COVID viruses are not something that is necessarily your specialty, but I understand the way that you research things, and I know how much you've put into this over the last couple of months. And when you reached out to us, we were so grateful that you did, because finally this is we waited out for the right opportunity to talk about what a pandemic is, where these diseases are coming from, and we're so grateful to have you here today. I know you've been working in the ERs. Can you tell us a little bit about what's been happening in the hospitals? Because the news or individuals have made it seem like COVID is a hoax, and that it's not actually in the hospitals or in our world, and all of this is being made up. So what are you saying?
Well, it's definitely not a hoax, that's for sure. Everybody knows how hard the world has been hit. And I think in people's day-to-day experience, if you don't have anybody who is sick, then you may think that it's not a big deal. But there have been places that have been flooded with, cases, like places like New York and Italy, and things were really, really bad. And due to the measures that we've taken with social distancing and closing things down here in Canada, and then now slowly opening things back up, we have managed to control the number of cases so that we weren't flooded. This flattening the curve, so to speak, has worked, but there's still a lot of progress to be made, and we don't always know what that looks like. There's some uncertainty there, but we've seen a lot of cases over time in the hospitals. Many people, the majority of people, may contract COVID and they'll get better and they'll be okay. But there are certain people who are at greater risk, especially elderly people, and some of the nursing homes have been really hit hard. And there's been a lot of deaths as well. Right. So we haven't been flooded, but we've seen a steady number of cases, and some of those people have gone to the ICU, and some have survived and some have not, but definitely things could have been worse. I think some of the measures that we've been taking are effective.
Do you think that some people who would have been able to survive whatever disease it is that took their lives would have been, possibly they could have lived through it, but they didn't go to the ER, they didn't go to the doctor, they didn't go to the hospital because they were scared, or they were thought that they needed to stay home, and therefore there are a higher amount of deaths that don't have anything to do with COVID itself, but that are kind of a byproduct of it?
Yeah, I think what you're alluding to is that it's changed a lot of things in our society. In the emergency department, people were, scared of coming to the hospital. People were staying at home. So a lot of people that would normally come to the hospital for a problem didn't come. Maybe they were getting less problems because people were working from home, staying home, not going out. So there could have been less accidents, less car accidents, less of many other problems, as well as people who might have had a heart attack and didn't bother coming to the hospital. And hopefully it was mild and they were okay. Within the hospital, you're not allowed to have visitors. And things work differently within the hospital. We manage a code blue. If somebody has like a cardiac arrest, we manage it differently due to COVID precautions. And that affects our ability to perform our job, because we have to take extra precautions. It makes things more complicated. And so there could have been some percentage of cases that didn't go well. One of the most tragic things is that if you're in the hospital, you can't have visitors. So for somebody who's in the hospital for a short time and gets out, that's okay. But let's say somebody was very, very ill and somebody died in the hospital. They may not have had any visitors, or they may have had very, very limited visitors, just only at the end of life. And so many people have died a very lonely death. And that's not what we want for people at the end of life, because, end of life is a very important time for people and families as well. So there's been these indirect types of tragedies as well.
Do you think that there's any numbers or stats being done on whether or not having these loved ones around you when you're near end of life and the opportunity to pull through and losing that opportunity to pull through because you're not surrounded by love?
Right. That's something that I haven't personally looked into in terms of research or data, but there is evidence. I know that there are different types of evidence showing that, social connections, having somebody get you up and walk, making sure that you're well nourished and people are feeding you and things like that. I think those things can make a difference to pull through an infection or pull through other kinds of illnesses too. So potentially this can affect some people. There was a very elderly sort of auntie from the temple who was hospitalized for a fractured hip, and she didn't speak English. Her family was not allowed to come to the hospital during her surgery or afterwards. And, she died sort of being in the hospital after a long time. It was a successful operation, but then she eventually sort of lingered and died. And there's a concern that, did she get fed enough? She doesn't eat the type of food that you would serve in the hospital. She doesn't speak the language. She doesn't know how to have people move her. To do some movement is important for recovery and for breathing and whatnot. And because of COVID precautions, it's hard for the staff to do as much as they could as well. So these things could affect people and could affect their survival too sometimes. And it's a big question mark. It's hard to prove, but it's definitely a question worth looking into.
So I want to move now onto the topic of choice for the day. And we really wanted to concentrate on COVID and where these pandemics are coming from and what is a pandemic. And there's a really big link, and we're seeing it. I don't know if the general public is seeing it, but we're seeing it because of our friends and our connections and what Facebook knows to feed us and whatever. But there's a big link between animal agriculture, between domestication of animals, and a lot of these pandemics that have come out before. So how can we help people understand this? And I want people to understand it from a really real perspective, and not just that the vegan community is looking for a way to make the world more vegan.
Yeah, this is a really, really important topic, and that's why I messaged you guys. That I've been looking into this, spending a lot of time reading and going through the medical and scientific literature about zoonosis with regards to COVID-19 and other diseases as well. And the thing that we need to know is that there's a big link between many of the new diseases that are coming out, that have been coming out over in modern history, and animal agriculture, use and contact and breeding and capture of animals in so many ways, that has been generating viruses and exposing them to humans as well. Okay. And so significant diseases have happened this way, and COVID-19 falls into this category. It's not just a freak accident that it came from a wet market in China. This is something that is caused by human activities. And that's what we need to see, because if we can understand that, then we can understand that this will happen in the future if we continue to do the same things, and that we can reduce or prevent a significant number of diseases, maybe not all, by changing this behavior around how we deal with animals, or around our use of animals in the first place.
So I've been watching some of Dr. Michael Greger's videos, and one of them, I believe, tell me if I'm right, and I'm sure we'll get into this later on, is that there were no pandemics, there were no widespread diseases before the domestication of cats.
Not necessarily cats per se, but let's go through maybe what is a zoonosis in the first place.
Sure.
Maybe a good place to start is to define our terms. You know what I mean? So a zoonosis is basically an infectious disease. So an infection caused by some kind of a germ, okay, we can say, like a virus or other type of like bacteria, parasite, or something like that, that comes to us through animals, okay? So it's a disease, an infectious disease that comes to humans through animals. Now, some things like malaria, for example, it comes to us through a mosquito. What we're going to talk a little bit more about in this podcast are diseases like COVID-19 that come to us through animals, but through the human use of animals, through animal agriculture, through mass animal agriculture specifically, okay, through the mass animal agriculture. So that's what a zoonosis is, and we're going to talk about zoonosis.
Just to say, it's not necessarily eating the animals, but it's having these animals together and the way that they're taken care of and all of the hygiene around it and things like that. Is that right?
Right. So exactly. So let's talk about what a pandemic is too. All right. So a pandemic is basically the spread of an infectious disease that goes over a large region. Okay. For example, spreads internationally and affects a large number of people. Okay. That's sort of the definition of a pandemic. Now, why does this happen with animal agriculture? How is animal agriculture contributing to this? Okay, what we can do is we can run through, how it happens with maybe COVID-19 first, and then go through a few other diseases where you can also see the same pattern emerging. Okay, so in a wet market in China, for example, now there are wet markets everywhere. Okay, there are probably wet markets in Canada. There are certainly wet markets in the United States and so many countries around the world. So this is not a Chinese thing; could have happened in any wet market. But China has a higher risk because of the scale of the wet markets. What you have is people are capturing animals from all over the place, from wild animals, essentially. Okay, they're capturing them from nature. Some of them they are breeding, so they're not domesticated animals, but they're wild animals. But they're breeding these wild animals. Okay, and they're breeding hundreds of thousands of them. They're breeding millions of them. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry in China. The scale is huge. You have different animals all housed in a congested area. They're stacked on top of each other. They're stressed. Their immune systems are down. They're living amongst each other's body secretions, feces, urine, blood, and all kinds of things. So they're basically passing viruses and diseases to each other all the time because they're not socially distancing, obviously. And then these viruses infecting back and forth different species, infecting different animals, these viruses mutate. That's one of the things about biological life. You get variations in the genetics as a virus or any organism reproduces. Okay, and these new types of mutations, some of them can be dangerous to humans. At the same time as all these animals being there, you have humans that are there. So humans are coming in there and they're purchasing animals, they're purchasing body parts of animals, and they're being exposed all the time. So on the one hand, you have all these viruses that are being generated. On the other hand, you have humans that are being exposed. And when a dangerous virus occurs, it then has a chance to get into humans and then maybe spread within humans too. Okay, and that's why as we're continuing these wet markets, as well as other forms of mass animal agriculture, we're always, generating and being exposed to new types of viruses. So in this case, it was COVID-19. And the pattern was that, there's a lot of viruses. There's, thousands of viruses that actually reside in bat populations around the world. Okay. And these don't normally infect humans because bats do their thing. They have all these viruses because they live in, let's say, caves and other places where they are cramped together. They live, it's normal for them to have like even a cave where you might have 100,000 bats in some cases. They're living in close proximity to each other. They're always exposed to each other. They also fly long distances and, meet other bats. So they harbor these viruses, but their immune systems are adapted so that they can handle these viruses. Humans don't necessarily, don't usually come into contact with these bats. But in the wild, some animals do get in contact. Also, we don't know all the mechanisms, but when we're housing thousands or hundreds of thousands of animals and bats get into the mix, there's a chance that a bat flying around that place where the animals are stored may pass something on to these animals because they're so concentrated. All these animals are so concentrated in some kind of enclosures, and bats like these types of enclosures, right? So they may get exposed to bats in the wild. They may get exposed to the bats within human captivity. So these animals get infected either in the wild or within human captivity, and they then pass on these viruses and and you have this system of transmission and mutation that I was mentioning to you before, and exposure. So bats usually infect people through an intermediate host. Okay, we don't usually come in contact with bats, and if we do, we're not usually going to get infected by coronavirus. People do eat bats and get injured by bats when they're capturing them, but they haven't necessarily gotten coronavirus all the time. But it's through these intermediate hosts where the virus is passed around and acquires more mutations that a dangerous variation can then infect a human.
So sorry to interrupt. So if we're at a cottage and there's one bat stuck in the house, the probability of being infected with a bat disease is pretty low because that's not where they're all congregating and staying. But if somebody's hiking and gets lost and has to sleep for a couple of nights in a cave, and they're there with all of those bats where that's their home and they've been interacting with all of these other bats, there is a more likely chance of that person getting infected. Does that make sense?
Well, the more exposure you have, the higher chance you have of getting infected with something. But now a bat in the cottage is a different story. Now, there is also rabies. Okay, rabies is a disease that you can get directly from a bat to a human. Okay, so if you have a cottage and there's a bat found in the cottage, you should go to the emergency department and inform them. And public health will probably give you treatment for rabies prevention if you're bitten, but sometimes even if you're not bitten, because sometimes the fear is that you might have gotten bitten by the bat, and the bite might be so small they might have just sort of bit you. You don't even find a mark anywhere. So generally, I think right now public health would be informed, and the public health here in Canada would determine whether you need some rabies shots, okay, and immune globulin and immunization as well. So that's okay. That's a bit of a different story. So you can, I should correct myself. You can get some diseases like rabies, but I'm talking about when we're the pandemic type of diseases, right? Because rabies is not spread generally from one human to another, right? It can happen, but usually that person is isolated and identified, and we haven't had a lot of human-to-human spread because we prevent that from happening. When it comes to these things like coronavirus, people in China do hunt bats and capture bats. It doesn't seem that coronavirus came to humans through bats. It seems that the bat viruses got into animals, particularly in this case, an animal called a pangolin, which is one of the most highly sort of trafficked animal in the world, and it's an endangered species as well. And mutations and whatnot occurred in the pangolin, and from the pangolin came into humans. Okay, so the pangolin and other animals potentially served as intermediate hosts before humans got it from the pangolin. Okay, and that's what happened. So it went bat to pangolin so we wouldn't normally be exposed to a coronavirus from a bat. It's just due to this wet market situation, capturing of animals, breeding them, having them live in these kinds of conditions, and having human exposure that caused this to happen. And predictably, it will happen again if we continue these kind of things. So we're going to get other viruses. It could be a coronavirus. It could be another virus too. But this is a high-risk type of industry where more viruses are certain to come.
And so it got passed from, let's say, China, from people eating it or working with the animals there, and then possibly through transportation of those animals' bodies all across the world, and that's how it became this pandemic? Well,
not quite like that, but I think that people, what the evidence shows is most likely people got infected at the wet markets, maybe through eating, but maybe just through being there. Because these animals are there, their secretions that may carry the virus are around in the environment. right? It's not a very hygienic place. As I mentioned, there's blood, urine, stool, feces, and residue of these things everywhere. So people may get infected there, not necessarily by eating, but by different things they touch or breathing, air that has virus particles in it or other ways. And then we get to human transmission, because the variant of the virus, of the coronavirus, happens to be one that can infect humans and that humans can also pass on to other humans. So the spread outside of the wet market is human-to-human transmission. It's not because they're necessarily transporting these animal body parts. It could be that people are transporting some of the animal body parts, but it's much more likely that what happens in the end, at least, is that it's human-to-human transmission. Now you have you have other environmental factors. There are other things that humans have done to the environment that increase the transmissibility once you've acquired the virus. So we have very high population. There are billions of human beings. If you look at the biomass of human beings, we outweigh all of the wild animals combined by a big factor. Okay, so there's many humans, so many humans around. So our population density, the number of people that are there, the amount of international and local travel that we have. So there's a lot of travel that we do that exposes us to other people and around the country and around the globe. Okay, so that's the next step of human-to-human transmission.
Are we learning from history, and do we have what to be scared of coming up? What other pandemics have been created from similar situations?
Right. Well, since we're talking about COVID-19, there are two other significant coronaviruses, that have caused serious human infections. So in 2002, 2003, there was the SARS epidemic, which was also a coronavirus, which started at a wet market in China. That's where the majority of the evidence points towards, and that one looks like it came through civet cats. So civet cat, again, you have bats, which are the sort of reservoir of disease in the wild, which doesn't directly affect humans in any way. It's not like you have to go there and eradicate the bats. They're doing their own thing. But we create the situation where we're capturing animals, we're breeding animals in these conditions where they can pass on the virus to many different species, and you acquire more mutations. And in this case, civet cats seem to be the sort of final stepping stone where a viral mutation could affect humans. And that was the SARS virus. The SARS virus had a much higher mortality, but less transmissibility than COVID-19. So there was a lower number of people who were infected with the SARS virus, but as a percentage, there was a higher number of people who died. Okay, and so that was the SARS pandemic back then, and I was there at the time, and working, and we had to take all these precautions and use N95 masks and do a lot of things, and luckily it was more quickly contained than COVID-19. But for the people who died from it, they did suffer just the same. The other coronavirus is MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. And that's not, and that has occurred, that most likely started in Qatar. Now, in various ways, these camels have long been infected with coronavirus. But what happened in Qatar was that in the 1950s, you had maybe like 6,000 camels in the whole country. But as the country grew and developed into an oil boom, the population skyrocketed. The population was very low in Qatar. There was maybe 15, 16,000 people living in the whole country. But, by the time you get to the, 2011, there's more than, there's 3 million people living there now, and more than 90,000 camels. And camels were grazed initially. So the people would graze the camels, right? And they would not be in close contact with each other all the time, or and they wouldn't be contained, so many camels in the same place. But because they bred so many camels, it was devastating all the remaining wildlife in Qatar. And they only had 1% of vegetation left. They went from 10% vegetation, maybe already impacted by camels, and then down to 1%. And you had severe desertification. So they banned the grazing of camels. People put them in closed quarters where they're all stored similar to a factory farm. And now they're passing on viruses to each other. And now the viruses have a chance to mutate because there's so much passing of one virus to another camel, You have this rapid transmission, high rates of infection, maybe stressed animals, more mutations of the virus, human exposure, and a bad variation came out. And the MERS virus, it's a coronavirus, and it has a high fatality rate. It's 30% of people who are diagnosed with it will die, actually. But it hasn't hit the high numbers that COVID-19 has, but it's an ongoing problem, and it's also serious. And again, more mutations can occur. You can have a new version of the MERS virus that can be more highly transmissible. If we continue to keep all these camels together and they continue to sort of pass viruses between each other, we're generating more mutations, and it's only a matter of time until one of those mutations can be more dangerous and cause a bigger problem.
What's making these mutations happen?
That's a biological process. See, all biological life is meant to have a certain amount of mutations and variations. So humans, obviously, we reproduce sexually, right? You have sperm and egg, they meet together, and you get a different combination of genes. And because of that, all humans look different. We have different characteristics. And it's sort of the natural selection theory of evolution. You get different variations, and some of those variations have certain advantages, some have disadvantages, but that variety causes us to be able to adapt all the time, right? Because you're always looking for new variations that can have a better chance of adapting to the environment. You also have stability. Not everything is going to be radically different. We all function. We have a certain amount of stability and a certain amount of newness, right? Now that happens with bacteria, that happens with viruses, that happens with plants, it happens with all life, that you're going to have some genetic variation. And that is part of the process of natural selection. The problem is for us that when we put all these animals in close quarters and we have a huge number of viruses generated continuously because we brought all these animals together, thousands and hundreds of thousands, millions, in fact, in some cases, we're generating so many viruses more than what happens in nature. So we can talk about what happens in nature. In nature, if you have a virus, let's look at a virus like the influenza virus, for example. The influenza virus, influenza A, is generally found in water birds, okay, like ducks, for example. Now, they have a virus, and the virus, and when they poop, they release the virus. It's mostly a gastrointestinal virus for them. And other ducks or whatever are eating from that same water, that pond, let's say. They get infected, and they carry the virus. Now, the virus needs to survive, right? What the job of biological life is to continue surviving. So in nature, it's a very benign virus. Because if that virus was to kill off all those ducks, then that's it. It doesn't have anywhere to go. It doesn't have anywhere to survive. So if there's a dangerous mutation that occurs in that virus, it may sort of self-destruct because it may kill off those ducks. And then that's the end of it. It may not have a chance to infect any other ducks, and the virus is gone. But the stable viruses that infect the ducks but don't really cause much harm continue to survive generation after generation because they're not killing off their hosts, right? So in nature, there's a kind of a balance and stability in most cases, like we talked about with bats. The coronavirus may exist in bats, but it's stable. It doesn't kill off the bats. The bats have an immune system that's adapted to all these viruses, and they just sort of live there. They have not too much exposure to other animals. They have minimal exposure to humans in nature. And people have been living amongst, in nature where there are bats, but not really getting infected. But we've now created these situations where we get animals we have mass animal agriculture, where now a virus that's otherwise benign has the chance of spreading and spreading and spreading. And in these conditions, when you have, let's say, a barnyard with 1 million chickens, that flu virus that is very benign can infect so many chickens, have so many mutations, and the dangerous mutations have a higher chance of surviving even. Because when the chicken now gets really, really sick and has a huge number of virus particles generating within its body and coming out in its maybe poop, but also then mutating to infect its respiratory system. So there's respiratory secretions and sickness, and the chicken actually dies. There's actually hundreds of other chickens around right in the immediate vicinity to still infect. So the more dangerous virus may actually have an advantage over the benign virus because it's in a crowded situation. You can generate a huge number of viruses, kill your host, and through the blood and secretions of your host, infect other chickens around you. So a dangerous mutant, which would not survive in the wild, because there's just small populations of birds that are spread out, in the factory farm situation, in a mass animal agriculture situation, can have a chance to infect and spread like wildfire.
Sorry, so does that mean that every year when we go into, and I'm using air quotes for those people not watching on YouTube, flu season, that
right,
the newest version of flu season or whatever people are getting vaccinated against is the most dangerous mutated version of some kind of chicken virus that's then going to the people who work with the chickens and then going home to their families, going to schools, and then spreading that way? Is that essentially what's happening, or am I simplifying it too much?
That may be a bit of a simplification, but that's a very probable mechanism. Now, there's two types of influenza that generally infect humans, influenza A and influenza B. Influenza B tends to spread more between humans. So as, humans, we communicate and we're in touch with each other globally through our communities and then international travel. We spread around influenza B. And that's mostly due to human-to-human contact. And then there's mutations that occur, and you get new versions of that will come around. Influenza A, however, spreads from human to humans, but also spreads between animals. It's the one that really comes from animals, right? At least currently. So that's right. Our animal agriculture, our breeding of chickens, as well as breeding of pigs, causes these interspecies and intraspecies transmission, causing new mutations, and is part of the seasonal flu that we're also getting. It may not be the entire part, but it is a big part of it. So we talked a little bit about flu and how in nature it's benign, but in the factory farming, in the mass animal agriculture situation, it's not benign because, bad variations have a chance to continue spreading and being dangerous to their host and also being dangerous to humans. Right, and finding a new host, and like that. So let's talk about some historical flu pandemics. If we talk about the Spanish flu, that started from the United States, and it wasn't a factory. Probably it didn't occur in a factory farm like we have today, where you have sometimes hundreds of thousands or maybe over 1 million chickens. Okay, but it was still a form of larger animal agriculture that people were doing. There was pigs and there was chickens. So there was more than one species brought together on these farms, and there's abundant number of animals. Okay, and they got infected, and there was some mutation that occurred that infected humans. And so what we think is that it started in the United States at a certain place in the United States. It's in fact a place called Haskell County. And there was a Dr. Loring Minor who first sort of noticed the pattern that was emerging. And so it went from ducks to chickens to pigs to humans, probably passed into pigs again and infected a bunch of people, and then continued to spread human to human. It went around the world. It probably killed about 700,000 people in the USA and 40 million people worldwide. Those are the estimates. It was a devastating, devastating disease. Okay. And probably a third of the world got infected. That was probably about 500 million people at the time, because at that time there was about 1.5 billion people in the world compared to the nearly 8 billion people today. And it only had about a 2.5% mortality rate in the United States. So that doesn't sound so high, but when you're infecting so many people, the numbers really add up. Right. So, and that's what happened, so that infected a lot of people and, only had a 2.5, not only, that's still a high mortality rate, but more than 95% of people survived, but the numbers really added up, and it was devastating. Now, there was an Asian flu. This was an H1N1. That was the Spanish flu. There was an Asian flu that started in Asia, and that was in 1957, about a 1 million deaths worldwide, maybe 100,000 in the USA. And we got a lot of USA stats here because they collect stats and you're easy to access. In 1968, the Hong Kong flu, that was 1 to 4 million deaths worldwide. Okay, that was the H3N2. There's these different components of the virus, these H's and N's that that mutate and we use to identify the virus and are also part of the infectious process, how it affects humans and how it transmits. And a lot of the deaths in that flu were less than 65. So it's not the older people, but younger people getting disproportionately affected. Okay, these mostly came from chickens, right? For the breeding of chickens. Now, the 2009 swine flu, I was working in 2009, and there was a swine flu epidemic. And there was a girl in one of the emergency departments that I worked at. She was a young girl. She was 4 or 5 years old, I believe, who died from the swine flu. And her family all came to get tested, which we tried to tell them that you should stay home and not come to the emergency department. But they all came to the emergency department to get checked up. They were very worried. And I actually got infected probably by the swine flu. I wasn't tested, but I got all the symptoms, and I was really, really sick from the swine flu. And luckily I recovered, after, a week or two. But there was 150 to over 500,000 people who died worldwide, 150,000 to 575,000 dying worldwide. Those were the estates. Okay. Again, more young people under 65. And this was, again, the virus being passed on between pigs and chickens. I'm using the word pig, combining these words, virus passing between chickens and pigs, generating so many different mutations as is ongoing all the time. And a dangerous variant coming out and infecting people, okay? And then human-to-human transmission that follows, okay? So again, animal agriculture, mass animal agriculture, it's not like you have a couple of backyard chickens, it's mass animal agriculture when you have thousands and hundreds of thousands of animals together in that space or flowing through the same space when you cause these problems to happen, okay? And so that's influenza. Now, there's other viruses that we can use as examples, a couple of historical viruses. Measles, for example, comes from another virus called rinderpest. This rinderpest, may have infected people in ancient times when they started bringing animals together and domesticating animals. And probably in the 11th or 12th century, around there, it mutated to a new version of rinderpest, which became human measles, and has been infecting people ever since. It's a very transmissible virus. Now, throughout history, there have been hundreds of millions of deaths probably from measles, okay? And we eventually developed a vaccine. But before the vaccine, you'd have, in many cases, with the higher human population before the 1960s, you might have had 20 million deaths per year, mostly in children, okay? And after the vaccine, it, diminished a lot. And between 2000 and 2018, there's an estimated 26 million deaths from measles. Now, 86% of all children are vaccinated throughout the world. So there's a lot of immunity and less spreading because we have something called herd immunity that you decrease the spread because of immunization. But even in the year 2000, there's probably about 500,000 deaths. And in 2018, probably 140,000 deaths due to measles. Well, that's the estimate. Okay, so still a significant amount of deaths. But this is something from ancient times. We got probably a mutation that affected humans and has been affecting humans since. Smallpox is a similar virus that probably, again, got into camels or other domesticated animals as well, and eventually mutating through our domesticated animals, infecting us, right? So camels was probably the final intermediate host that infected humans maybe 3,000-4,000 years ago, and we got smallpox, and which then affected people throughout history. And probably in the 20th century, it caused an estimate of 300 million to 500 million deaths over the years. Okay, and my mom's auntie, there was people in my mom's family infected in India, and my mom had an aunt who died in childhood, due to smallpox, and in those days, many people were affected. Sometimes entire families died of smallpox, but eventually our vaccine programs got so good that we have pretty much eliminated this disease from the earth. But we're going to talk about this again.
Just taking a pause to ask you if you're looking to go plant-based without the worry about what to eat to stay healthy, especially if you can't find the time to do the research. Don't worry, because here at Plant Trainers, we have you covered. If you're looking to up your athletic game or start training for a race or make sure you know exactly what to eat, Adam can solve your dilemmas and help you get to where you want to go.
If you're dealing with inflammation, autoimmune disease, hormone disorders, or need to relieve anxiety with natural techniques, Shoshana can get you feeling like yourself again and in control. Send us an email to info@planttrainers.com and we'll hop on the phone with you. For you, our amazing listeners, this is a complimentary call to get to know you better, see what your goals are, and let you know how we can help. No pressure, but a real connection. What do you have to lose? A few minutes? Let's do this. Contact us at info@planttrainers.com. And now back to the show.
Because I'm going to talk about new infections that can happen to humans, and possibly we can get another virus like this again.
And so it seems like humans are not learning their lessons over the years. This has been going on for a long time. It seems like a lot of the issue is stemming from the close proximity of animals and animal agriculture, and it's been consistently growing that way and moving that way. And now we're at a point where, okay, we're not keeping our animals socially distanced, but we're keeping ourselves socially distanced because of COVID right now. And if that's going to be the solution, by keeping us, how long are we going to be doing this for? Like, are we waiting for the next vaccine? Like, what's the solution? We're not. How realistic is it for us to think seriously that animal agriculture is going to stop working the way it is right now? I don't know. Like, there's so many big companies behind that and dollars behind that, and they're not going to say that that's the solution.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a complicated thing. I think that it's over the past, 2 to 3 decades that we've really realized, that we've really seen the pattern that animal agriculture is causing these problems. Okay, now, even before the first SARS pandemic in 2003, you see literature coming out suggesting that, hey, if we're breeding animals together in close proximity in high numbers, we're going to generate viruses that are going to affect people. You see that literature coming out. After the first SARS epidemic, 2002, 2003, after that time, you see a lot more medical and scientific literature coming out and alerting people about this, okay, that this process exists and we're going to get these problems from breeding a lot of animals, okay? And now, we've had, more cases of, we've had more outbreaks. I'm going to go through a couple of things. Now there's wet markets we've gone through. We've gone through factory farming, right? With the influenza is a great example of factory farming causing some pandemics, okay? Or mass animal agriculture. It's involved Western countries. Let's talk about also another type of animal agriculture called the bushmeat trade. Now, that occurs around the world where people, like even in China and over here, people go out and hunt and they bring back wild animals, right? It occurs in Africa too. And 2 important viruses have emerged from the bushmeat trade in Africa. And one of them is HIV, okay? So through people going and hunting different animals, especially monkeys in this case, there's chimpanzees and sooty maccabees and different monkeys that harbor a virus called simian immunodeficiency virus. Now, again, when we say SIV, it's not just one virus. Remember, there's that virus, and there's many variations of that virus because these monkeys and different species, they pass it around, and there's mutations. So there's, just like humans are different, these SIVs, there's different strains of SIV and different mutations occurring there. People hunting monkeys, this is an industry that grew. As populations grew, as there were more industries that would go and harvest animals for the bushmeat trade, as there are more inroads into the forests because of logging companies. There's a pattern where logging companies would go deep into forests where humans might have lived in small populations. There may have been, Aboriginal peoples who lived in small populations in the same area for long periods of time, and they're kind of stable with all the different things in their environment. And now it becomes an industry where people in the cities want to start eating, these wild animals. And it's not just a small thing. It's a huge trade where you're talking about millions of animals being hunted and transported. The exposure is a lot more, and the interhuman contact is a lot more. So people have been getting infected with SIV, or different strains of SIV, for decades, actually. But because of the high amount of exposure, then a variant called HIV, affecting humans like HIV, human immunodeficiency virus, one of these mutant strains affecting humans in that way, got into the human population. Now, it didn't just happen once. That's the interesting thing about the literature. People have probably been infected, not just one person getting infected by a monkey, but people getting infected over and over again in different scenarios. This virus passing around different monkeys populations and different people hunting those monkey populations, getting separately infected, and then passing it on human to human as well. Okay, so it wasn't just one incident. And so it's when you're catching monkeys, you're butchering them, you're getting injured sometimes, you're getting cuts, you're exposed to the blood of monkeys, and that's the sort of most likely way that somebody gets infected by, the blood and secretions of a monkey, through the capture, butchering, maybe consumption, of the infected monkeys, and then passing it on human to human. Okay. Eventually, when there's more international travel and more local travel, then more people in Africa getting infected, and eventually people internationally getting infected. It was a process, where we're having this it's a form of mass animal agriculture. It's not just somebody going out and hunting. It's a big, massive trade and of wildlife. Okay. Ebola is similar. It's also part of the bushmeat trade. In this case, people may get directly infected by bats because the Ebola virus can pass from bats to humans and infect humans. But also it may infect intermediate hosts like monkeys, or there's a forest antelope that sometimes gets infected. I'm not sure how badly it will affect each animal in each case. There are Ebola-type viruses that can sometimes wipe out a group of gorillas, or sometimes it may just reside in the gorillas, not making them too sick, but have a greater effect in humans. Those are different possible mechanisms. But the bushmeat trade is also dangerous. Now, Ebola has not killed as many people as HIV. HIV has killed maybe about 32 million people since the start of the global pandemic. And Ebola is more localized, so maybe more considered to be an epidemic where it's more localized and not a pandemic where it's more spread. But there's been 10 to 20,000 deaths, over the past decades, since the 1960s, that we have recognized, caused by not just Ebola, but similar viruses, because these things may die out, but then people get reinfected through the bushmeat trade by another variation of Ebola or a similar virus. So it's something that happens again and again, that humans get infected through animals and then pass it on human to human as well. So it's a repeat thing. So again, it's something that if we could stop ourselves from the bushmeat trade, we can probably prevent new Ebola infections. Although right now, again, because of dense human populations and so forth, Ebola there's an outbreak right now that's sort of brewing, and we haven't quite stopped it yet. And part of that also, issues of justice here, justice towards Black people, and the amount of resources that people should be getting to help stop this, to stop HIV in Africa, was a very slow response. And drug companies and the international community didn't do enough. And drug companies, in fact, interfered with providing treatment in Africa and other places, other developing countries as well. And Ebola right now is probably not getting the attention it deserves. If you look at UN reports, they're continuously saying that we need more resources to help deal with this problem. But those are two important infections through bushmeat. That's another type of animal agriculture. So we've gone through wet markets, we've gone through bushmeat, which could happen in other places as well. We've gone through factory farming in the case of influenza, and we've gone through a couple of ancient diseases through earlier forms of animal agriculture, and that was measles, rinderpest, and smallpox. Okay, so we've covered a few things there, and so I don't want to give the audience the impression that all infectious diseases come through breeding of animals. No, but a significant number of very serious diseases have come that way, okay? And in terms of the new diseases that seem to be turning into pandemics, we're talking about COVID-19, we're talking about MERS, we're talking about SARS, we're talking about influenza viruses in recent history. These big outbreaks are caused by animal agriculture, plays a very central role in the generation of the viruses or the acquisition of the viruses and spreading into humans. That's a very serious problem. And we can predict that these are going to happen in the future as well, unless we decrease the amount of mass animal agriculture that we are doing on the planet.
What else can we do besides decrease the amount of mass animal agriculture?
Right.
Besides wash our hands, of course.
Right. So there's two things we can do, right? And Dr. Greger puts this very nicely, Dr. Michael Greger, and we'll talk about his book in a little bit. But what he says is the best way to survive a pandemic is not to have one in the first place. Now, that's a direct quote from his book. So what he's saying, there's things that we can do to prevent the virus from existing in humans in the first place, or prevent generating the virus and getting humans infected in the first place. So that would be to reduce mass animal agriculture. Now, people want to do things like, okay, well, maybe we can have these big animal farms, like breed a bunch of animals, but reduce the amount of human exposure, have biosecurity, and make sure that my animal population, doesn't get infected by a virus from the outside. That's actually very, very difficult to do, and that's going to take a long time to explain. So I don't want to get into it too much, but it's very hard to prevent your animals from getting infected. In fact, many times there are animals who get infected. We hear in the news all the time. Every couple of years you hear, in some country, could be the USA or it could be an Asian country, where they're killing 2 million chickens because there's some kind of an avian influenza spreading around, right? And they just say, okay, they take these chickens and they bury millions of them alive, or they burn them alive, or gas them, or they do different kinds of things because there's some virus spreading like wildfire, killing all of the flocks, and they just want to get rid of it. So those are the kind of things that you do, aside from not having mass animal agriculture, to try and prevent infections. That's one of the things that are done. People may try to immunize animals. But that's also difficult to do because the viruses are always mutating and it's expensive, right? They may try to isolate their farm from other farms, different things. But all these things are very imperfect, And despite having such biosecurity measures already, we're still getting new viruses coming out all the time. You don't hear about all the viruses. There's always new viruses that are coming out, and there's research done. If you start looking into the literature, you don't hear about them because they're not really that dangerous to humans, or they may have been dangerous but only infected a few people. Okay, but every few years, maybe for example, you have 2002, 2003, you have SARS. 2009, you have swine flu. 2019, you have COVID-19. So, it could be every 5, 10, 15 years that we're going to get some new virus, But as mass animal agriculture increases across the globe, that frequency could also increase.
And are these viruses getting more and more severe each time? And if this is what we're going through today in 2019, 2020, what is it going to be like in 2023?
And that's the thing. It's not necessary that they will just get more severe over time. It's just that you're always generating new viruses. And some of them can be milder and some of them can be more severe. Now, the more severe form of a virus could already exist. For example, you may have some pigs or chickens with a very severe virus, a very dangerous virus, I should say, that if that virus happened to jump into humans, it would cause a really big problem. But that virus is also competing with millions of other viruses, other variations, and that virus may not have infected a human and caused human-to-human spread. Or it may have infected a human, but just that human got better and they were okay and it didn't spread. But those viruses may already exist, but have just not had the chance to spread into humans, okay? But they could be there already. But, we don't know, right? Because we're not testing all the different genetic combinations in animals continuously. We're not doing that all the time. But in the future, it's just like a game of roulette every year. And we're going to have, at some point, a more severe virus. Now, for a virus to be more severe, think about this, okay? Now, we think that there's a lot of cases of COVID-19 that are not diagnosed. There's a lot of asymptomatic people that may have the virus, and we may not know the mortality rate. So we may not know the full number. But when they estimate, when you look at certain literature, maybe the real mortality rate, the amount of people who die after getting infected, is between 1% to 2%. That's kind of an estimate that's out there. Could be a bit more. Could be a bit less, okay? But what if you just had a virus that had double the mortality rate, right? What if it was like SARS or MERS that had triple or 10 times the mortality rate? What if that happened? What if it had the same mortality rate, but was more transmissible? So it had a higher amount of spread. It was the same mortality rate with double the spread or triple the spread, or let's say 10 times the spread. So same mortality rate, 10 times the spread means 10 times the amount of people could die. Or you could have a virus with double the mortality rate and double the amount of spread and 4 times the amount of death. If you look at how COVID-19 is affecting the world right now, it's affecting the economy, affecting people right now. Think of something that was just twice as bad. Think of something that would be 4 times as bad, double the transmission, double the mortality. Think of something that could be 10 times as bad, could be double the transmission, but 5 times the mortality, right? You're going to have big problems around the world. And this is a very dangerous thing. And it brings us to the topic of what kind of viruses could infect us in the future. And those are existing viruses. We can have a new variation of influenza. That's a particularly dangerous virus because it can be so transmissible. It can be airborne. And also it can have a much higher mortality rate than what it currently has in seasonal flu. We've seen examples of this. You could have a new form of coronavirus that could be more transmissible and also have a higher mortality rate. You could have an infection, a new infection of something like smallpox. Now, because I told you I was going to get back to that, because, see, we've eliminated smallpox, but cowpox and monkeypox and these different pox viruses still exist. And they still exist in rodents, but they also exist in cattle, right? Now, you go to a place like India, which has the highest cattle population in the world, and these viruses exist there, right, in these different cowpox variations. And humans are always exposed. Now, what if you had a variation that, again, mutated to the similar danger level as smallpox? There's a very good paper on this that I recently read and that I have, that says that you can have a mutation of one of these different pox viruses. It could be camel pox, it could be cowpox, okay, and then reinfect humans and start the smallpox pandemic all over again, which is a devastating, dangerous virus that spreads very fast, has devastating consequences, and even if you don't die, it can deform your skin, right? And it can have a very high mortality rate as well. Okay. Now, luckily, we know how to make vaccines for this. Okay. So probably we'd make a very quick vaccine. Okay. But in the meantime, a lot of damage would be done. So, that's smallpox. And that's something that a country like India could have a higher chance, but other countries as well could generate this virus. Then there's another virus going on right now. And that's a very interesting virus. It's called African swine fever. Okay. African swine fever. African swine fever is a known virus that infects pigs, basically. It's most prone to affecting pigs, and likely originates somewhere in Africa, but it's affected animals, pigs, especially all over the world. Okay, and it exists in pig populations everywhere. China currently has the highest population of pigs. They have the highest pig industry. That means they have lots of pigs together, starts between pigs all the time, creating new mutations all the time. And it just so happened that very dangerous mutations have happened of that virus, most likely from China, spreading other places, but have killed half the pig population in China. So they've killed over 500 million pigs in China. Between the virus and also culling the pigs, because if they see one pig infected, they kill all the other pigs, right? Because they don't want to spread the infection. So between culling the pigs and between pigs dying of this infection, over 500 million pigs have died. Over a quarter of the world population and half the China population of pigs have died. These are huge numbers just in the last year or two. 500 million. It spreads so fast, and it causes an Ebola-like reaction. It's not an Ebola type of virus. It's a different virus altogether, but it causes bleeding, internal bleeding in the pigs. Okay. Now, pigs are not that different from humans. There are a number of viruses, aside from influenza, that infect pigs and also infect humans and also infect chickens and whatnot. Now, you have millions of pigs generating mutations of this virus. What if one day you have a variant that infects humans and you get a new disease in humans that didn't exist in humans before? A very dangerous thing that causes us to bleed internally and spread very quickly because you have all these secretions, like in your lungs, you're coughing up secretions, you're coughing up blood, you're spreading these virus around. And what if it spread in humans as easily as it spreads in pigs? And how fast could that go through humans and how much damage can that do? It would be devastating. So this is not something that's in humans, but is a new type of virus, an example of a new type of virus that we could get through animals. Okay. And there are others, because there's many other viruses out there. There's many viruses that could be in farmed animals, but also viruses that are in nature. And those viruses in nature, whether they're in bats or other animals, when we congregate our animals, or when we catch animals from nature, having these bushmeat or wet market type of trades in many countries, not just Africa or Asia, but anywhere else too, then we're exposing our farmed animals to new viruses as well. And then they spread within those animal populations, creating new mutations, and then can cause a danger to humans as well. So there's new viruses out there. There's actually, thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of types of viruses. And it's not just animal agriculture that's part of the role here. That's a big central role. But also we're cutting down forests. As I mentioned before, in nature, you have human populations that have lived in a place for thousands of years and they're stable with their environment. And they have a certain type of interaction and balance with their environment. But as we go cutting down forest, as we go harvesting animals from nature and transporting them to urban populations that are not part of the natural kind of balance that are there, we're transporting them to urban populations, and we're doing it on a huge scale where we're talking about, not like original human populations or Aboriginal populations, but we're talking about, in the millions and billions of animals now. We're causing disruption of nature and exposing ourselves to many things and at risk of new types of viruses. So it's breeding of animals, it's animal agriculture, but also intrusion into nature, also global travel, also environmental problems like climate change, and all these things have a combined effect as well. So animal agriculture plays a central role, but these other humans' activities can exacerbate the problem with animal agriculture, and also on their own play a role. For example, we cut down nature and do all kinds of things, and we may create more malaria or different types of viruses like that, right? Or we spread the mosquitoes in different parts of the world, and we have a disease that was in one place but now comes to another place, right? So there's other things that we're also doing outside of animal agriculture, but it's part of the abuse of nature that exposes us to different kinds of things, like, let's say, different types of malarias or things like that. So there's other things too. But animal agriculture, in the cases that I've talked about, plays this very, very big role in certain types of diseases, and we seem to be, getting pandemics every few years because of it.
So let's bring it back to what we're dealing with right now. It's the middle of June, and we're still dealing with COVID-19, and a lot of different countries and areas are starting to open up. Society's starting to get back to kind of the way it was before, not entirely. There's some concern. I mean, I have a feeling that we're going to see numbers rise as far as COVID again, because we saw it go down. We're opening things back up. People are starting to go back to regular life. Those numbers might go back up. How do you see this playing out over the next couple of months, and what should people be doing to be able to protect themselves when they are going back into society?
Or even other viruses, not just COVID-19, because our immune systems are now used to the viruses and bacteria we're living with here in our homes, and then all of a sudden you're going back into society and being exposed to all these other things all over again that have mutated while you've been reading books at home.
Right. Well, the latter question, like when we start exposing ourselves back to the society and whatnot, I don't think that for other viruses right now we have any major danger, like major danger, it rhymes. We have like cold viruses, different viruses that cause the common cold and the flu that goes around and those kind of things. Maybe we have less of that transmission because people are really socially isolating, right? And wearing masks and so forth. I don't think there's going to be a big danger. We may get some more common colds or regular seasonal flus, which as a doctor, we recommend people getting immunized for the seasonal flu, right? And those things, I don't think that's a big danger. The idea of a second wave of COVID, right? Or if we're going to have COVID-19 spread more as we sort of release the restrictions, that's not something that I'm going to have expertise on right now. I'm just going to quote you the same thing that most of the other doctors quote you, that there are unknown factors, that we're going to be continuously listening to our public health authorities who are going to be monitoring the spread. We should continue the recommendations that are going on in society right now. So right now, the recommendations is still to have social distancing, try to wear a mask if you're in areas, especially indoor areas. Outdoors, I think it's pretty hard to get infected if you're socially distancing because there's really good airflow, right? But when you're in closed environments, going to the grocery store and places like that, I think that the best recommendations right now that we have are to do social distancing, to wear a mask, because you could be an asymptomatic spreader, and even speaking and breathing can sometimes spread a little bit of virus, okay? The louder you speak, or if you're coughing or doing things more, you can spread more if you have the virus, but you may not know that you have the virus. So, social distancing, wearing a mask in public areas, especially indoors, that's the most important thing, and not touching everything, using hand sanitizer, going into a place with clean hands. Don't touch everything. If you're going shopping, don't touch every single tomato. Just pick the ones you want and take them. Don't touch all the rest of them, right? And taking those basic precautions and following what public health has to say is very important right now. And as the recommendations change, I think in Canada we're really lucky. We have excellent, public health doctors. In Ontario or Toronto, we have Eileen Davila, and in Canada, we the people who are there are really, really good people, and we're very lucky. So we're going to follow what they say and what they recommend, and go. There'll be a stepwise opening up, and there's some unknown factors. We don't exactly know how it's going to be as we open up more. I think what's going to happen, it's going to you open up a little bit, see how it goes, and then pull back or go forward depending on that. It's probably what's going to happen. So these things about the animal agriculture, I've been spending hundreds of hours actually reading them over the past 2 or 3 months, and I have like hundreds of papers with me. With this kind of a thing, I'm following what we've been told by the hospitals and by public health to do. So I think that's the best thing I could say there. Since I'm talking about them and I gave them a shout out for a good job that they've been doing, I'd like to give a good shout out to, all kinds of frontline workers, people who like my colleagues in the hospitals and everywhere, doctors, nurses, PSWs, oh my God, the work that they're doing, security staff, clerics, everybody in the hospital and medical system has done a really, really good job. They've been really brave. People have had to face anxieties about going to work and getting infected, bringing something home to their family. Those are really serious concerns that people have had, but people have been very dedicated and very courageous and have done a really great job. There's been some tragedies, healthcare workers, people working in the hospital. Some of them have died. Somebody in my hospital died who was a cleaning staff, in one of my hospitals. And that's tragic. And frontline workers everywhere. All kinds of frontline workers, like to be commended for the good work we're doing. So little shout out, but that's what I'm going to say about opening up again. So no major new insights from me. Just the humble thing that the public health authorities are saying. I'm just going to say what they say.
and a big shout out to you and all of those other members of the hospital and members of society that have stayed open and have been working to help people get through. So big shout out to all of them. And I want you to have an opportunity to share your website with everybody, because I know that you have linked to a lot of the different studies that you're talking about today, and there are a lot of them there. So let everybody know about your website, what they could find there in terms of Corona and otherwise.
Yeah, I always want to be humble and sort of evidence-based about what I say. Okay, so obviously there's a lot of information out there, and forgive me if I've said something that's not perfect, or also realize that what I have said does not reflect the full amount of data that we have, and even the papers themselves, they talk about the range of knowledge that we do have and also the range of knowledge that we don't. But if you go to my new website, I've teamed up with somebody named Nicholas Carter, awesome guy, and we've created a website called Plant-Based Data, where we're aggregating as much of the scientific and medical and other types of literature that we can about plant-based diet versus animal agriculture as it relates to environmental issues, global environmental issues, as well as medical issues. So when we're talking about heart disease, diabetes, cancers and things like that, putting all the best literature that we can together in one place for people to go and look at that literature and access it. If you're a curious person, if you're an academic, if you're a student, if you're a policymaker, if you're an activist, whatever it might be, that you can find information in one place as much as possible. And that's a great place to start. So I want to promote that, plantbaseddata.org. With regards to pandemic information, one of the best resources is Dr. Michael Greger, and you got to give props to this individual. He's amazing. The amount of work that he must have put into his new book, How to Survive a Pandemic, and I have it, and I look at the references there. There are thousands of references, thousands of papers and points of information that they've looked through and amalgamated into this one book and put together a very rational, well-balanced, intelligent interpretation of how animal agriculture has caused past, present, and potentially future pandemics, and what we could do to reduce that. So a lot of the things that I also have put together are because I found them in some of his resources, but then continuing to do my own literature searches, incessantly. So but it's a very good recommended resource. On our plant-based data as well, we have a section on pandemics is there, and you can see a few hundred papers there about many different topics.
If people want to reach out and connect with you, is there anywhere else you'd like them to go?
Good question. I think that people can find me on Twitter at EcoDocTush. I'll put that in the show notes for you guys, so you can find me on Twitter. Because sometimes if we find good papers and good reviews, we put them there. That's probably the best way. And plant-based data as well. We're going to regularly, post new articles there as well. I think that's a good place to start. If somebody is, maybe like an academic person or somebody who needs to really get in touch and wants to delve deeper into literature, then through plant-based data, they can email us, and we can try to help them out. You know what I mean? I usually get, I try my best, but it's hard to keep up on top of communications, that's for sure.
Yeah, we'll put links to that in our show notes at planttrainers.com so people can check out those spots. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to share all this incredible research and important information with all of our listeners and with us. And hopefully we'll start moving in a direction where we could start to prevent these pandemics from continuing or from evolving into new ones and become just a healthier planet as a whole, because that's really what needs to happen. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I used to think that there was two big sort of material reasons to go plant-based. Okay, the material reasons, you can leave sort of ethical or philosophical considerations or, humanitarian things aside. But for health, there are very, very compelling reasons that we're going to be healthier on a whole food plant-based diet that's, is well balanced. There's good evidence for that. There's a huge amount of evidence in terms of the environmental impact of animal agriculture, and tremendous evidence. It's unreal the impact that it's having on the planet, and maybe we can talk about that again someday. I know we've done so in the past. And now I've realized that, I used to lump these infections, these pandemic infections, in with the health causes, but now I realize that it can rock the world, and it's a topic unto itself. This is a reason unto itself for reducing mass animal agriculture. If somebody has a couple of, backyard chickens, that probably isn't going to lead to the problem. But when we start bringing high numbers of animals together on bigger and bigger farms, we increase the chances again and again of having these pandemics. So it's the third big reason, material reason, for a plant-based diet.
Appreciate you. Thank you for being here.
Okay. Appreciate you guys. Thank you for the work you guys are doing. All right. And hopefully this will all be over soon and we can see each other in real life.
For sure.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay. Take care, guys. And we'll talk soon.
Thank you all so much for listening to this edition of the Plant Trainers Podcast. We want to make sure that you subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or any other podcasting platform.
We really appreciate the feedback we receive from you. Every time we get a 5-star rating or review on iTunes from one of our fans, it really helps other people find us just like you did.
Thanks so much to our patrons. To become a patron, visit us at patreon.com/planttrainers. Even supporting us with $1 really makes a difference in the quality of the show.
And don't forget to connect with us on Instagram and Twitter. Our handle is @PlantTrainers. Like Plant Trainers on Facebook, join our newsletter, and check out our website at planttrainers.com for awesome recipes, a list of our services, and of course, our latest podcast.
We encourage you to email your questions to info@planttrainers.com so that we can help you improve your quality of life through nutrition and fitness.
So we hope we've inspired you today. Join us again next time and have a healthy day. Or is that too corny?
It's a little cheesy.